Ever try to get public records and get hit with like a totally insane fee?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. Michigan's Freedom of Information Act.
Right. FOIA.
FOIA, yeah. Just got a huge overhaul. And we've got excerpts from a lawyer's webinar
Okay.
that breaks it all down.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is big, especially for like journalists or, citizen watchdogs, anyone who cares about open government.
Right.
These changes, they impact how you request info,
Yeah.
the fees, and even like how to challenge those fees.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The fee structure is completely different now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Instead of that old, vague, actual cost language,
Right.
they break it down into 6 specific categories now.
Wow.
3 for labor and 3 for actual costs.
Okay, so give me an example. How does this actually play out?
Okay, so imagine you need minutes from like an old city council meeting, but the only copies are on paper. Before charging you to scan and email them wasn't explicitly allowed. Now it falls under non-paper physical media labor costs.
So it closes that loophole.
Yeah.
What about the actual labor costs themselves? Did anything change there?
Oh, big time. They capped what public bodies can charge for labor.
Okay.
They can only bill you the hourly rate of the lowest paid employee capable of doing the task.
So even if like some high-paid official handles the request, I'm only charged the rate of like some junior person.
Exactly.
Wow.
It levels the playing field, prevents those inflated fees.
Interesting.
It's a significant power shift, really.
What about redacting sensitive information? Any changes there?
Yeah, they can charge for redaction time now,
Okay.
but there's a catch.
Okay.
If they already have a redacted version, they can't charge you again, even if you're a different person requesting it.
So they can't just like keep charging everybody for the same work?
Nope. And speaking of preventing unnecessary costs,
Yeah.
remember those unpredictable paper copy charges?
Oh, yeah.
Gone.
What's the new system?
10 cents per sheet for standard sizes.
Okay.
Plus, they have to use double-sided printing if possible.
Makes sense.
Saves you money in paper.
Seems like they're trying to make things more consistent
Yeah.
and fair
Yeah.
for everyone. What about if the information is already available on their website?
If it's online, you shouldn't be charged to access it electronically.
Okay.
However, if you want a paper copy of something that's readily available online,
Right.
they can add those fringe benefit costs
For printing and mailing.
for printing and mailing.
So think before you print.
Right.
What about the wording of a FOIA request? Do you need to use any specific legal jargon?
No need for legal gymnastics.
Okay.
A clear, straightforward request works.
Okay.
But using certain language like mentioning FOIA, prominently,
Yeah.
can trigger a fee reduction if they respond late.
So what are the strategic implications of that for requesters?
It encourages them to respond promptly.
Right.
And that fee reduction is 5% for each day they're late.
Oh, wow.
Up to 50% off labor costs.
Okay.
So it's not a guarantee,
Right.
but it's a good safeguard.
Yeah. That's a pretty good incentive. What about those people who file FOIA requests constantly?
The serial requesters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The law offers some relief for public bodies,
Okay.
dealing with those who don't pay their bills.
Right.
Under certain conditions, they can require a 100% deposit up front
For future requests.
for future requests.
So if there's a pattern of unpaid bills,
Exactly.
the public body can protect themselves.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance
Right.
between access to information
Right.
and preventing abuse of the system.
All right. So what happens if I get a fee and I think it's totally unreasonable?
You can challenge it.
Okay.
Most public bodies now have an internal appeal process, specifically for fee disputes.
So that's the first step.
Yeah.
What if I'm still not happy after that?
You can take them to court,
Okay.
but there's a 45-day statute of limitations.
So you can fight it, but you have to act fast. What about penalties for the public bodies?
There are some hefty new fines for those who willfully violate FOIA,
Okay.
potentially reaching $7,500 per violation.
Woof. That makes them think twice about following the rules.
Yeah.
It sounds like this new law brings some much-needed clarity and balance
Definitely.
to FOIA in Michigan. What are some other big-picture takeaways?
One thing that stands out is the focus on clarity and timeliness.
Okay.
Public bodies are now required to provide good faith estimates
Okay.
of how long it'll take them to fulfill a request,
Right.
and they have to respond to appeals within specific timeframes.
So no more being left in the dark,
Exactly.
wondering when or if you're going to get what you requested.
And if they don't respond within the given time frame, it's considered a denial.
Oh, really?
which gives you a clearer path to appeal.
So they're really streamlining the process, making it more user-friendly, but also
Yeah,
holding them accountable.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But there are still some nuances to this new law, particularly around how fees are calculated in certain situations.
Okay.
So let's dive into those next. So let's talk about how fees work when the information you're requesting is already available online.
Okay.
This is where things can get a little tricky.
Right. What if I request something that's already on their website? Can they still charge me for that?
Generally, no. If it's readily accessible online, they shouldn't charge you anything for electronic access.
Yeah.
It's all about encouraging people to use those online resources.
Right.
But it gets interesting if you insist on a paper copy.
Okay. So I'm old school. I like to have my paper. What kind of charges can I expect then?
Well, they can definitely charge for the paper and mailing,
Right.
but they can also apply a higher fringe benefit multiplier
Yeah.
to the labor costs
Okay.
associated with printing and mailing those documents.
Hold on. I thought we talked about a cap on those fringe benefit charges.
Right there is, generally it's capped at 50% on top of labor costs.
Right.
But this is an exception when the information is already freely available online. It's like they're saying, we're happy to provide this electronically for free, but if you really want us to print and mail it,
Yeah.
we're going to have to pass on some of those administrative costs.
So it's a little nudge towards digital, but you still have the option for paper.
Exactly.
This whole thing seems to be about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of options, there's an interesting wrinkle with verbal requests.
I thought FOIA requests had to be in writing.
For a formal request, yes.
Okay.
But the new law allows public bodies to respond to verbal requests if they choose.
So if I call up City Hall asking for something specific,
Right.
they don't have to help me,
They don't have to, but they can.
but they can.
And here's the nuanced part.
Okay.
If the information is available on their website, the person who takes that call
Right.
is supposed to tell the requester about the website address.
So even a casual phone call can trigger this website guidance.
It highlights the importance of everyone being up to speed on these new rules.
Right. It definitely seems like a shift in how public bodies handle information requests overall.
Yeah.
What about those situations where you submit a request and you just wait and wait and wait?
Right.
Any changes there?
Yes. Public bodies are now required to provide a best efforts estimate
Okay.
of the time frame for providing the records.
Okay.
It's not a hard deadline, but it gives you a better sense of what to expect.
So no more radio silence.
Right. And that estimate has to be based on their duty to provide information promptly.
Okay.
The nature of the request itself
Mhm.
and the state's public policy of transparency.
So they can't just give like a ridiculously long time frame
Exactly.
for a simple request.
It's about setting realistic expectations.
Okay.
And remember that magic language we talked about.
The stuff that can trigger a fee reduction if they respond late.
That's the one. Well, the consequences for late responses are even more significant now.
Okay.
Missing the deadline essentially solidifies their denial,
Mm-hmm.
and the requester has a much clearer path to legal action.
So it's really in their best interest to respond on time and in writing to avoid any
Exactly.
ambiguity.
It's all about clarity and accountability on both sides.
Okay, but what if my request is denied, whether it's because of fees or the content itself?
Right.
What are my options for pushing back?
Good question. The new law is very specific about challenging fees.
Okay.
Most public bodies now have to have an internal appeal process specifically for fee disputes.
So before I even think about court, I have to try to work it out with them directly.
Exactly. It's a chance to resolve things informally and potentially save everyone time and money.
Okay, so I submit my appeal, make my case, but let's say they just aren't budging.
Right.
What then?
You can take them to court.
Okay.
However, remember that 45-day statute of limitations.
So act fast. Is this the same process for challenging a denial based on the content of the records?
Not quite. With fee disputes, you generally have to go through that internal appeal process first.
Okay.
For content disputes, that's not always required.
So another example of the law promoting internal resolutions.
Yeah.
Whenever possible. What happens if I decide to sue over fees? Does that delay everything?
Yes. The public body doesn't have to finish processing your request until the court makes a decision.
Oh, wow.
And if the court finds that they overcharged you by 50% or more, they can order them to pay your attorney fees
Oh,
and legal costs.
that's a powerful incentive for them to keep those fees in check.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And beyond the specific appeals for fees, there are also new penalties
Okay.
for public bodies that willfully violate FOIA in general.
Right. We talked about those fines.
Yeah.
Anything else?
If a court finds a public body acted arbitrarily or capriciously in denying a request.
Meaning they didn't have a legitimate reason for withholding information.
Exactly. They can impose a $500 civil fine.
Okay.
That money goes to the state treasury, not the requester.
So it's not about lining someone's pockets. It's about upholding the principle
That's it.
of transparency.
On top of that fine, the court can also award the requester up to $1,000
Okay.
in punitive damages.
So there's a financial hit for the public body and potential compensation for the requester
Right.
if they were wronged. What about those really serious violations? Are there any consequences for those?
Yes, for willful and intentional or bad faith violations, the penalties get much steeper.
Okay.
We're talking civil fines ranging from $2,500 to $7,500
Wow.
per occurrence.
Those are some serious numbers. What factors determine the amount of the fine?
The court considers things like the public body's budget,
Okay.
past FOIA violations,
Uh-huh.
and the severity of the current violation.
So repeat offenders might get hit harder.
For example,
It seems like they're really cracking down on those who just disregard the law.
they are. This new law significantly raises the stakes for transparency and accountability.
Right.
And it's not just about the penalties, but also the overall shift
Right.
towards a more structured and transparent process.
Right. We talked about those good faith estimates for timelines, the
Yeah.
clearer pathways for appeals, and the emphasis on making information readily available online.
It's a comprehensive approach to modernizing FOIA
Right.
and ensuring it serves its intended purpose.
This has been incredibly informative. What's one final takeaway our listeners should keep in mind as we wrap up?
Remember, these changes don't just impact journalists and legal experts.
Right.
This impacts anyone who wants to understand how their government works.
Right.
Whether you're curious about local development projects, school board decisions, anything else that affects your community, FOIA is a powerful tool for getting answers.
It's about empowering citizens to engage in the democratic process. So don't be afraid to ask those questions.
Thanks.
You have the right to know. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground, but
Yeah.
I'm curious about one specific detail.
Sure.
Earlier, we talked about that timeline for responses and appeals.
Right.
What exactly constitutes a business day under this new law?
Oh, that's a great catch. It's very clearly defined now. A business day is consistently Monday through Friday, excluding federal holidays.
So no more confusion about
We'll
local
answer that.
government schedules or
Nope.
shorter weeks.
It standardizes things across the board.
Okay, so it's 10 straight business days
Yeah.
to respond to a written appeal regardless of how your local government operates?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And remember we talked about how not responding within that time frame is considered a denial?
Yeah, it seemed like a big deal.
Well, now it's even more significant because that's when the clock starts ticking on the statute of limitations for filing a lawsuit. And if the public body missed that deadline because of that magic language
Yeah.
or because they were intentionally dragging their feet,
Those willful violations.
exactly, failing to respond basically solidifies their denial, giving the requester a clear path to legal action.
So it's crucial for public bodies to respond promptly and formally to avoid any ambiguity
Yes.
or unintended consequences.
Yeah, this process is all about clarity and accountability.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about what happens after a request is denied. Whether it's about fees or the content itself, what are the options for appealing those decisions?
Okay, well, the new law lays out a very specific process for challenging fees.
Okay.
Most public bodies are now required to have an internal appeals process in place, specifically for fee disputes.
So before even thinking about court, you have to try to work things out internally.
Exactly. It's a chance to resolve things informally, and potentially save everyone time and money.
Okay, so I submit my appeal, I make my case, but let's say they just aren't budging. What happens then?
If you're not satisfied with the outcome of the internal appeal, you can take the public body to court.
Okay.
However, remember that 45-day statute of limitations.
So act fast. Is this the same process for challenging a denial based on the content of the records?
Not quite.
Yeah.
With fee disputes, you generally have to go through that internal appeal process first.
Okay.
For content disputes, that's not always required.
So another example of the law encouraging internal resolutions
Right.
whenever possible.
Exactly.
What happens if I decide to sue over fees? Does that put everything on hold?
Yes. The public body doesn't have to finish processing your request until the court makes a decision. And here's a strong incentive for them to play fair. If the court finds that they overcharged you by 50% or more, they can order them to pay your attorney fees and other legal costs.
Wow. That's a pretty big hammer.
It is.
Yeah.
It encourages public bodies to get those fees right from the start. Now, we've also talked about those hefty fines for willful FOIA violations. Are there any other consequences they might face?
Right.
Yeah, there's one more interesting provision. If a court determines that a public body acted arbitrarily and capriciously in denying a request.
Meaning they had no legitimate reason for withholding the information.
Exactly. The court can impose a $500 civil fine. But that money goes to the state treasury, not the requester.
So it's not about like personally benefiting from their mistake. It's about upholding the principle of transparency.
That's right.
And making sure that there are consequences for bad behavior.
Well said. And on top of that $500, the court can also award the requester up to $1,000 in punitive damages.
So a financial hit for the public body and potential compensation for the requester.
Right.
If they were wronged. What about those really egregious cases, though? Those intentional violations? What happens then?
Those are treated very seriously. We're talking about willful and intentional or bad faith violations.
Yeah.
And the penalties are significant. Civil fines can range from $2,500 to $7,500 per occurrence.
That's a big jump. What factors determine where they land on that scale?
Well, the court takes into account the public body's budget, their history of FOIA violations,
Okay.
and the severity of the current violation.
So repeat offenders could be hit much harder.
For example,
It seems like they're really serious about ensuring transparency and accountability.
they are. This new law is a major win for open government in Michigan. It modernizes the process, clarifies procedures, and provides stronger incentives for compliance.
This deep dive has been incredibly helpful. I feel like I have a much better understanding now of how FOIA works and how I can use it to stay informed.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, you don't have to be a lawyer or a journalist to utilize FOIA. This is about empowering every citizen to engage with their government and hold them accountable.
It's about making sure that our government remains open and accountable to the people that they serve. So if you're curious about something, don't hesitate to ask. You have the right to know.
That's a great note to end on. Remember, knowledge is power, and FOIA gives you the power to ask those tough questions and demand transparency.